Welcome to another episode in our Experimentation Engine series. We've been exploring how real teams embed experimentation into how they design, how they build, and how they grow their products. So for this final drop, we're zooming out. What does experimentation look like when it's not just a design or research practice, but when you bring a strategic product mindset to it as well? And our guest today is none other than Kritarth Saurabh, who is the VP of Product at Neat, where he's leading the charge to scale a product-led experimentation-driven culture from the ground up. And before Neat, Kritarth helped enterprise organizations like Accenture and BCG to bring product thinking into places that were not built for it. So think global banks, telecoms, and insurance firms. And he's led agile transformations, integrated design agencies into consultant giants, and he's shaped roadmaps across different industries. So welcome to the show, Kritarth.
Good to be here. It's an exciting topic, so looking forward to getting started. Thank you for having me.
All right, and with me today, I've got
Emmanuel. Good to be back again, and good to meet you, Kritarth.
Lovely to meet you as well.
All right, so Kritarth, we've just ran through your impressive bio, right? You've watched the product discipline evolve in a lot of ways since the early days of Agile, when it was just starting out and things like that. So what's the most significant change that you've seen with how experimentation has fit in the timeline of how Agile has evolved over the years?
It's a really good question, right? And I think it'll help if we go back to a little bit of the history of Agile, right? So in my mind, if you think about it, early 2000s, we were, software engineering and development was rife. People were looking to ship code, get out. But large projects were running into delays, right? And that's where the whole kind of Agile mindset and Agile focus kind of took shape. So early Agile and all the principles that it goes with, they focused on one thing, which was shipping outputs faster, right? So it was born out of a necessity, which was, hey, we need to get products out, we need to get features out, we need to get software out, and things were running into delays, right? There were huge projects that were running into delays, and that meant money, right? So there was a need for people to be able to kind of focus on shipping outputs faster, but it wasn't about validating the value, right? And I think that's where the mindset shift has changed from where early Agile started to where we are today, right? Agile has been a stepping stone for us to understand, look, how can we break things down? How can we structure things? How can we iterate on things? How can we put some processes and some ceremonies around that? But the next evolution beyond that, in my mind, is the focus on value, right? So I think it's about how do you shape experimentation, how that's shifting from just doing a A/B test at a UI level, but also changing that to be shaping product direction, right? So how do you shape where you want your product to be? Who do you want it to be? What's the impact you want this product to have? And I think more and more teams over this period, and this is over the last 10, 15 years, and I think it's helping, is they're realizing that speed without learning is waste, right? Which in my mind is critical, right? You have to be able to do things fast, but if you're doing things fast and you're not learning, that's wasted, right? Because you're not getting better, you're not improving. So experimentation, I think, is where we are in my mindset today, where it's becoming a tool to de-risk strategy, not just optimization, right? So experimentation in Agile started with optimizing, and it said, look, let's optimize, let's kind of do some basic A/B tests. We can run a couple of sprints and see what happens. Whichever goes through, we'll go with that value. And that was great. That worked well, right? But I think that mindset is now saying, look, can we use experimentation to de-risk strategy? Because development is expensive. It always has been, right? Whenever you start. So I think that's the shift that I've seen, at least.
Okay, so if we're thinking in terms of folks who have all of this gripe to pick or bones to pick with Agile as a framework, because one thing you said is like, when we look at the future, it's more about how do we de-risk strategy as opposed to continuous optimization. And we definitely have like organizations who are very much, you come from very massive orgs, right? So you understand that. Organizations that are very much based on that continuous optimization with no clear strategy. And it's just like the tiny pieces on top of where we can map out exactly what contributed to this. How does that fit into this as well? Like, how do you even begin to talk about the mindset of switching around from that tiny piecemeal optimization to the de-risking part of things?
That's a really good question, right? And I think at the heart of this, in my mind, is the mindset shift, right? Which I spoke about. Like, if it's about de-risking strategy, then you've got to strategy is always tied to an outcome rather than an output, right? It inevitably is, right? And I think it's that mindset shift to go from, hey, I'm not wanting to deliver an objective, but I'm here to deliver an outcome. And I think, just to give you an example, right, what that means is, in an objective led world, you're going to go, let's build X by Y date, right? So that's let's ship a feature by Q3. Let's ship feature X by Q3. Excellent. Or let's kind of, that's fine. And that works, right? And that has been working so far. And that is great. That is, it has its place. But in an outcome led world, it's not about the feature, it's not about the time. It's about, how can I achieve the impact for my customer or my business, right? It could be B2B or B2C. It's about, what do I need to do to be able to achieve an impact? I don't know, increase customer retention by 10% for my customers. That's the strategy. So that shift in mindset is kind of what defines the success in my mind, right? And that's how you kind of go from naturally moving from a culture of where you've been optimizing continuously to kind of build things and get that out. But this naturally, that mindset shift kind of drives hypothesis work in my mind, right? So you ask yourself the question then, all right, if my goal is to increase customer retention by 10%, what needs to be true for this outcome to happen? And now you've asked a question that can have multiple legs to it, right? You can think about, these are the things that need to change, these are the data that we need to collect, these are the experiments we need to run. But you've broadened your scope than saying, you know what, I'm just going to build this and I think this is going to change, this is going to increase customer retention. And it might, right? It might. But what you might not see is the wider picture of, what's the learning that I can have, that I can not just increase it by 2%, I can actually increase it by 20%, right? And I think that's the mindset shift.
Yeah, I mean, having the mindset shift is very, very important. I beg, in this our new sort of era of even the AI and the fast-moving world, and it's very interesting to see how a bit it could be. When I say, I don't want to use the word complicated, but then it could be a very long process in a very large org, like having that outcome-led development, not just in small silos, but then for an org in itself to have that same focus, not just being agile, only in silos like small teams. But let's look at in smaller teams now. So like maybe small team founders, right? For a founder who is building their first product or have an idea and is kind of actively building a first product and also considering hiring, how do you want to advise such founder to be able to inculcate the experimentation mindset from start, not just having it as an offset tactics like, this is what we do, maybe later on we've done something, but how do they really inculcate this from the onset of building a product?
It's a good question. Look, it's not easy. Right? I'm going to start this off by saying it's not easy. Experimentation and hypothesis led is a muscle, right? And the more you flex it, the better it becomes, right? So my kind of advice and my view on this is, I think it starts with hiring. It always does for early stage companies and people that you bring in and the product teams that you're putting together. It's all about the people, right? And I think one thing that I stick by, and there are different kind of roles for different kind of mindsets for what you hire and when you hire. For early stage, for me, it's curiosity over certainty, right? When you are you're an early stage founder and you're looking to build something, you want people that are curious. Yeah, because naturally you're building in an ambiguous world, right? Certainty is not going to be there. You're not going to have the answers. You're not going to have all the information before you get started. So you want people who are curious. And what that means is, you're going to ask yourself, how will we know that this works, is a more pertinent question in my mind than how do we build it, right? So when you have an idea and you're in an early stage company, you're trying to find product market fit, it's all about knowing, how do we know this is going to work, rather than, how do we build it? Building will happen, it'll come, but it has to be the right thing to build, right? So that's one way to think about it. That's one mindset. And I think the second mindset and the second part of that muscle flexing is, in my mind, the ability to use data and inform decisions, right? And both designers and product managers, they need to be comfortable with both qualitative and quantitative data, and being able to use data to prove hypotheses, not prove hypotheses. That kind of mindset is very important. So I think in my mind, those two things are super important when you're an early stage founder. You have to rely on the data, and you've got to think about what kind of questions am I going to frame so that I understand this is going to be working, right? And my final piece on this is the comfort level of engineering teams as well, around realizing that experimentation is just a part of delivery. It's just the first step of delivering something. It's not a separate phase. It's you experiment, you pivot, you deliver, you experiment, you might not pivot, and you just scale, right? So I think that mindset is super important. So for me, it all boils down to someone who can frame the problem deeply, right, before going to solutions. And that's important. Whenever early stage companies and founders, I think understanding the problem, knowing what it's going to take to get the product market fit, and being okay with uncertainty, right? And look, I have seen folks who rely on data so much that it almost becomes a crutch, right? Which is, hey, without data, I don't think I can take a decision. And you know what? Some of the new startups and things that turn up and early stage founders, they operate in an area where data might not exist. It's not always present. So you've got to be able to know when to flex that muscle and when to rely on it. And I think that's the mindset that's important.
Yeah, one aspect that I like you said is that one of the mindsets you mentioned is having experimentation as part of delivery. It's not separate from the delivery process. Like it's like a chain, like links everything together. And when you talked about hiring, you talked about curiosity and being data driven, so to say. I mean, probably you've been in a position of hiring people for such kind of scenario. Can you sort of clarify something like, when you say curiosity is about being curious, asking questions, those things. In your own opinion, like, how do you, probably in a designer or say in a product person, right? How do you pinpoint that curious mindset when probably talking to someone or sharing their cases? Like, how do you benchmark that in your own opinion?
And that's a good question, right? So one of the tips or techniques that I usually use while hiring is the CV is the CV, right? That's great. If you put it in front of me, it is your experience, it is what someone has done and achieved, and that's great. That's fine. So I usually tend to not spend a long time diving into the CV, right? That's great. You've told me, I believe you, I get it. You're here because your CV is impressive or your CV is appealing to me. What I'm really interested now as part of this interview process is the way you think, right? And it's the way you kind of solve a problem or you structure a problem. So me, and whether you're hiring designers or engineers or product managers, and product managers specifically, I go down the route of having case studies, right? Which is very, very broad opening case studies. And I go, here's a problem. And I'll give you an example, right? Which is, hey, I'll make up a mythical insurance company. We were brought in and the view was to, hey, we want to reduce 10% cost because that's what's required by the board. That broad a problem. Let's go. You're a product manager. Take me through the thinking. Or you can even frame that on the other way around. If you're hiring for a startup, you could go, look, hey, we're a startup. We're looking to build a self-servicing tool that is going to allow be deployed into multiple insurance firms. That's going to allow them to save costs.
Yeah.
Right. You're a product manager that's brought in. Let's go. Right. Let's take me through the thinking. What are you going to do? How are you going to structure the problem? How are you going to put some experiments? How are you going to put some bets in? How are you going to think about the unknowns? So I think that for me works at least for me, helps me understand someone a lot more through an interview process. And look, there is no right or wrong answer. People think very, very differently and they get to the eventual thing. I think it's more the ability to structure the problem, to frame the problem, and then be able to solve it step by step and go down. And you know what? It really helps. It helps drive a conversation. So that would be my one tip.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's take this into talking about hypothesis versus hunches or over hunches. What does hypothesis-led roadmap look like to you? And how do you make that real in practice? And I can give an example here where I've been in a scenario where the goal was, all right, we need to build an experimentation engine. And yes, naturally, it could be, there's so many ways you take to this, where one route could be, how do we align from like small bets to larger ones? When you're putting this into the roadmap, in your experience, what does your process look like? How do you make that real?
There are multiple elements to this, right? And I think you got to the first thing that you've got to, again, it comes down to mindset, right? A hypothesis versus a hunch. A roadmap that is built on hunches and features, and that will deliver well, right? Because most roadmaps today, they are built from intuition, from feedback from sales, feedback from users, feedback from things, and that's great, and that will deliver a certain outcome. The mindset shift that needs to happen is defining the outcome before you define what you're going to be doing. So your roadmap almost has to have an outcome written on it, which is, hey, in second half of calendar year 25, we want to drive the adoption of our tool by 20%. A line on the sand saying, this is what we're going to do. Okay, great. So now that's one of your outcomes that you want to. You could drive multiple outcomes. You could have another outcome that says we want to reduce the support burden by 10% or reduce cost by 10%. So you've now put two real outcomes in there. So now everything you put on your roadmap becomes a question, which is, all right, or a hypothesis, which is like, okay, if we do X, for example, let's talk about, reducing costs. So if we build a self-support chat agent where, we think we will reduce the number of inbound queries by 10%. So instead of just saying, let's go build a web chat that'll reduce support cost, we have now framed it as an experiment, which has said, hey, if I build a web chat into my support page, that is going to reduce by 10%. So before I go and build the expensive resources to go away and build a web chat and start building that and getting AI and all that stuff in there, I got to validate this, right? I got to think about, okay, so how am I going to validate this? So you go, okay, what are the metrics that I want to track, right? So you define some of the metrics. You go, okay, now the metrics that I probably want to track here is, and I'm making this up again, is number of inbound calls that are coming in, time that is spent on each of these calls, and average handling times. And I'm just making this up again, right? Average handling times, great. Those are inbound metrics. I want to be able to move these metrics with my whatever solution I come up with before I decide that web chat is the right thing for me to do. Great. So I've designed some metrics, I've designed some outcomes. Now it's about how you're going to validate it. Now it becomes, how are we going to validate it? Now it's, you could define simple tests, right? You could define a control group, and you could build a very, manual version of a chat. To say, look, I'm going to define a control group of 100 customers. I'm going to have a very sticky tape version of a chat that doesn't have all this expensive stuff sitting behind it and all these things. And I'm just going to run this experiment for a week, 10 days. 100 people, what happens? Do they actually go to the chat, or do they actually end up, still calling me? Because what you want to do is you ultimately want to reduce the call coming in. So you define that. You define a hypothesis. You could create very early prototypes and sticky tape prototypes, Excel spreadsheets. I've done all types of prototypes, right? I've even done where you had Excel, you got this full road of Excel sitting in there, and people sitting at the end of a phone making a call, because you're validating an experiment, and it has to be quick. It has to be dirty. It has to be minimal effort. Yes, there'll be effort somewhere else, but you're using the effort that is not expensive.
Yeah.
And you're proving it to say, hey, okay, I ran the experiment. Now I think I understand that, okay, I've run this experiment. All right, customers are calling for reason A, B, C, D. Okay, so I need to make sure that as part of my whatever solution or web chat or whatever I'm building, or it could, you could simply, out of that experiment, you could come out and say, you know what, I don't actually need a web chat. I just need a support page which lists out these 4 things, and that's it. That's going to reduce the calls coming in. So you see, you started with the difference was you could have gone in and said, I'm going to build a web chat tool that's going to now end up, and it might end up saving costs, right? It might end up some queries coming in, but you spent X amount of money, X amount of time building it. Whereas you ran an experiment for 2 weeks, you figured out that, hey, you know what? It's only these 4 or 5 things that generate a lot of calls. So a simple thing like a support web page, which has all these FAQs written up there, will solve the problem. So I've achieved an outcome, and I have managed to do that in a quick fashion and save the expensive time for other things, right? And that's an example.
I mean, that's a very great one. I like how practical and the way you're training those examples, which makes it more relatable. That's really, I really love them. So I'm going to go a bit biased now, and not because this is a growth design podcast, right? But then putting on the lens or the cap of a designer, like I'm putting on the cap. Yeah. So So when it comes to a potency-led roadmap, or when it
Yeah.
comes to experimentation, we know one of the key parts is that apart from setting the hypotheses, the test variant, or every other thing that comes with it, it all boils down to the probably the artifact that you want to experiment on, right? Now, for designers who are like, oh, I don't want to just be at the end of like making UI tweaks without probably, having a very deep understanding of being able to shape how the hypothesis itself is being formed, right? Just getting being dumped on this, oh, we need to change X to Y. Now, what advice do you want to give to designers who want to just go from that shift of just making UI changes to then making product level bets, like making laudable contribution to that process in itself, or to an experimental process in itself? What kind of advice do you give to such designers who are thinking that direction?
It's a good question, right? And I think I'll tie back to what I said earlier. It's going back to that curious mindset, right? And what that means, if you take that one step further, is you got to ask yourself, the question in my mind is, you could go, how should this look? That's one question. Or you could go, why should we even build this? It's that mindset to go, right, today I'm being asked to make this look, really good, or make the optimize the flow, and all that is great. Okay, that's fine. But have I taken the step back to ask myself the question, or ask the team the question, or ask the PMs or whoever the question, why should we even build this, right? So that's a very, very practical thing that you can almost kind of do, right? And then I think you got to almost be part of framing the hypothesis, right? So you got to almost go upstream to go, right, when the hypotheses are being built, you almost go, hey, how can I do this, right? So you go, what needs to be true for this to actually make a difference, right? So it's that mindset. It's that curious mindset. The curiosity will always push you further up as to why do we need to do this, and then once you're there, you've got to almost add the value, which is right. Here's some easy things that we can do to be able to frame this quickly, and I think that's that mindset shift to go from, let's just do this because I've been asked to do this, and I'm very good at it, and I can make this the best looking flow that's possible, the most optimized flow. Great, but it's about saying, can I push this a little bit further to go, why, and is this the right thing to even build? And then taking it, in my mind, one step further around when you're thinking about the hypothesis, right? What can I help prove the hypothesis one way or the other?
Amazing. Thanks. I love that.
Gosh, so much is coming up for like my brain is spinning over all the things that you're dropping. I'm thinking in terms of, I feel like we've gone around this circle of how do you go from just the hypothesis to the strategy and things like that. But let's bring this into practical terms and in your experience. What makes a strong hypothesis when everything is high stakes?
It's a very good question. I think a strong hypothesis at its core, and this is a completely different way of thinking, right? And it took me a while to get used to this, can be proven wrong. Right? It's a hypothesis. The whole idea of an hypothesis is it doesn't have to be right all the time. It can be wrong. Right? And even that is a learning. Even that is going to allow you to get a better outcome for your product. Right? So that mindset shift is, and it's a very difficult one. Look, not a lot of people, even I sometimes struggle with this, and I struggle with it a lot. And in a high stakes environment, how am I going to be able to stand behind a hypothesis that I ran an experiment and it just turned out to be wrong? And you've got to be comfortable with that, and the environment around you has to be comfortable with being wrong, right? Sometimes you learn a lot more by failing than you do by ever succeeding, right? So it's that learning mindset. So that's one, I think, in a high stakes environment, super important. The next thing you got to do is you got to be very, very clear to what outcome you're tying this, right? Where I've seen hypothesis-led thing fail is the outcomes aren't clear. You haven't tied it to a customer behavioral change. You haven't tied it to a business metric. It is vague. It is not, it's not specific enough. So when you come to prove a hypothesis or disprove a hypothesis, you're like, well, oh, I don't think I have enough data here. Oh, I don't think we've got the right answers. Oh, we don't, like, that all boils down to, we didn't frame this right up front. We didn't do this correctly. So in a high stakes environment, you've got to make sure that there's a clear outcome that you can measure, that you can track. The other example of this, and I think this is the final thing, is I think in my mind is it's got to be specific. It's got to be enough, specific enough. And this is hard. This is very hard, right? Without having to boil the ocean, right? You cannot spend months and weeks on research on boiling the entire ocean before coming up with a hypothesis, because then you've already wasted some very valuable time, right? So you've got to kind of almost keep it specific enough for you to be able to create an experiment and test, make sure you've got the metrics, make sure that you're happy to be proven wrong without boring. It has to be quick, it has to be fast, it has to be that fail fast mindset. That is super important, because even failing teaches you to learn. It teaches you something. So in my mind, I think that's super important when you're there, right? Yeah.
Okay, you're still on the hot seat now.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a hypothesis blow up in your face?
Oh, so many times.
Tell us about it.
I knew that question would come at some point, right? So I was working for one of the biggest kind of mortgage lenders here in the UK, and we were designing a digital flow for buying mortgages online. Right now, one of the things that you kind of go with is saying, getting a mortgage is a big financial step for anyone. Are customers going to be happy doing this online? Not a lot of people are going to be comfortable doing this, right, online. So one of the hypotheses around that was, and this is interesting, right, was my hypothesis at that point was digital natives, or certain folks within an age range, are going to be more comfortable doing this online than non-digital natives, right? And that was the hypothesis. So we went through and we said, okay, that's an hypothesis, because hey, we got to validate this first, and we're going to build an experiment around it. So we built it a very, 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 very quick, and I said, look, all I'm looking for from a data perspective is we'll create a control group of two different customer segments, and we will run the same test. And all I'm looking for is clear stats, right? To say, out of the 20 people that were sitting in this group, 15 were comfortable going through it and went through the entire thing, and they said, yep, got. Whereas in this group, so my hypothesis was that's going to be, the digital natives are going to be actually much better doing this than non-digital natives. You won't believe it though. We ran the experiment, and it actually was completely wrong. It turned out people who are non-digital natives, or who've been through a mortgage buying journey before and are on the second or the third, yeah, that's fine. We'll do it online. We understand everything about it. Absolutely easy for me to do it online. We'll do it. Great. Digital natives, people who are getting the mortgages for the first time, holy no. I am not going to do this online. And there you go, right? This is an example. It's a live example, right? And this is something that I've lived by. So one of my very, very first experiments and cases of doing this was, had we gone down the path of saying we're going to build the entire digital mortgage journey for digital natives, you're done. The uptake, the retention wasn't going to be there, right? It just wasn't going to happen. You would still have people walking into branches. You would still have people coming in. You would still have the same burden onto your organization. So all the reasons for building a digital mortgage journey wouldn't hold true, right? But just running that quick experiment, it didn't take long. It was a 2-week experiment, whatever it was. Do it, you validated it, and then you had that learning with you as you design that entire kind of flow. So there you go. That's one of my first, and I will not forget that for a while. So
Yeah. Okay.
you always remember the first one. You always do
Yeah.
when you get it wrong.
I mean, that's really interesting to know. Now, let's look at experimentation, the view of metrics and other things, right? So, when you run experiments, right, we know that definitely there's an outcome that has been set. Like, oh, this is what we want to test for. Now, how do you bring metrics into it that really ensure that outcome is being met, right? I know we have sort of like vanity metrics and all of that metrics. So how do you then ensure that you are actually working with the right metrics that matters to that particular experiment, and not the one that's just driving maybe one part of the story then hurting the other one? How do you balance it?
It's not an easy thing to decide the right metrics. And I spoke about case studies and running that with when I'm hiring people. One of the questions I do go through the case study is exactly the same question you've asked me, which is, hey, what metrics would you define? Right? And the reason I ask that question is because it's such a wide question, right? People automatically go, to your point, the first thought is vanity metrics, right? Let's think about things that always go up.
Yeah.
Number of logins, number of things that come. It's like,
Exactly. number of page
Okay.
visits.
I mean, it's telling you something. It's telling you your tool is accessible. It's telling you, your people can get to your site, or can get to your product, or get to your app, or whatever it is. But it's not telling you anything else. So my kind of view on that is always, I think when you think about metrics, you've got to tie them to behaviors to desired outcome, right? So, for example, you go adoption, frequency, expansion. These are good outcomes to kind of go into, right? Then you got to look for leading indicators rather than lagging ones, right? And what I mean by that is things that will give you information today rather than something that will happen after 6 months. Like, activation, to measure activation before you measure retention. Have you got enough people coming through the funnel who are willing to pay for your product? That is more important upfront than are those people willing to pay again for your service, right? So that's a very simple example, right? So you got to go for a leading indicator. So if you've got enough people coming through the funnel in the front, you can then optimize for them to be retained. But if you don't have enough people coming in the funnel, you're never going to optimize for retention, right? So that's a leading versus a lagging indicator. And I think where possible, it's always, in my mind, to measure user value metrics, right? And what I mean by that is people who are actually working with your product. Like, are you saving time? How often are you saving someone time, right? I mean, in a simple checkout flow, you add a basket, I find a product, can I find the product, can I add it to the basket, can I pay for it, can I check out, can I pay for it? Where can you optimize that, right? So you can go, okay, how quickly can someone find my product? Great metric to look at, right? Average search times, like time saved. Am I saving them time by helping them find the right product very quickly? And then I'll just push this a little bit further. You could go, well, with the advent of data and the way things are progressing and information is available, yeah, you could even surface up the right product even when they land on your page, so they don't have to search at all, right? Based on the data that you have and things like. So there's a lot you can do. So I think if you measure the right metric, then you can build the right things behind it, right? So if you say, look, the time it takes for someone to find the right product before they add it to a basket, that is a great metric to measure. Then you could go, right, okay, once they've added to the basket, how long does it take them to get from there to actually checking out? Well, it's taking them too long. And when we measured this metric, the average time it was taking them was a minute and a half, because they have to fill out all these extra details and blah 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 blah, and customers just get bored, and by the time this allows them to start thinking about their product, and then they just abandon the cart. Okay, would an integration into something like a Google Pay or an Apple Pay make this faster? Now, yes, it might. And the idea is that you might want to kind of test that. Are customers willing to pay via Google or pay via Apple or whatever is their preferred pay method? And that's just, if you measure the right metric, then you can build the right things to impact that metric. So in just that example, if you measure the time it takes to find the product and you measure the time it takes to check out after the product's in the basket, you can optimize both to make that flow completely great.
Okay, so we've got a great team that wants to experiment. Other teams that are resisting this experimentation. Could be failure, because obviously once you start to track, like set up an experimentation engine, we know many experiments fail before you get those winners. That may not be a good look when it comes to like stakeholders and partners and people who are involved in the big picture. Or it could just be like just stakeholder pressure. We don't have time for this, right? What are practical ways, in your experience, you've used to reframe the value to get buy-in as regarding why experimentation is important and how it can contribute to the bottom line?
Very good question. Very, very good question. I think this is the funny one, and this I kind of learned the hard way. And this comes from having gone through the rounds to this, right? The best way that I found it is you've got to understand the audience you're talking to. That's super important. And one thing that resonates in most senior audiences and stakeholders, in my experience, it's a way to reduce risk, not delay. Experiments are allowing us to reduce the risk, and you've got to quantify the risks depending on who you're talking to. It's just not enough to say, "Hey, it's going to reduce this risk," but you got to quantify that risk, whether it is a financial risk, whether it is a customer risk, whether it's an adoption risk. You've got to quantify that risk. So it's allowing us to manage these risks and reduce the risk. It's not delaying it. That's one really simple, really practical way to think about it, right? that you can really start using experimentations. And I think the second thing is more downstream, right? You can see when you're done with the senior stakeholders and you're looking to kind of build with your engineering teams and things like that. It's about, it increases confidence before you invest engineering time, right? So it talks about, if I build this experiment, I'm more confident in this succeeding, and hence the engineering time I'm going to put into it is going to be more valuable, right? And that's two ways, right? So you've got the upstream way where you've got super senior stakeholders and you've got all those different people that are invested in the product. How do you talk to them about it? It's a risk reduction strategy. You've got to quantify the risk and you've got to be able to talk those risks through. For downstream and kind of getting it done, it's all about increasing the confidence, because once you have a lot more confidence, and engineers love to build things. And I'm an engineer, right? And I started my journey as an engineer. We love to build things that make an impact. We love doing things that change people's, at least in my mindset, I used to love doing things that would change people's lives and people leave views and people find helpful. So, being able to show that experiment is going to be useful, that also helps engineering teams. And you got to have some war stories, right? I think when you're talking about this, you've got to have some war stories to show how experiments have both saved time and saved from building the wrong thing, and how you ended up impacting a business a lot more, right? And that helps. So in my mind, those are the three things. And if all else fails, I think one thing that I've always, and this is a little bit of a joke and I say it half-heartedly, is what's the cost of being wrong? Are we willing to take that risk? Are we willing to take that cost? And that's a very, very simple. And I know it's a very broad question and things like that, but what's the cost of being wrong? What if we are wrong? And that helps frame the problem. It helps us and anyone who's kind of going down the experimentation and to go and find stuff and information and data and experiments to help convince people.
I mean, when you look at people, like when you want to convince people, right, you need to convince based on who they are, right? Understand what they need, what are the things that are priority for an engineer, for a finance person, just like what you've said. I think I've been in the shoes where I've got hurt by not understanding that. So I think I really enjoyed how you frame it. So it's always good to understand the context of who you're talking to so you can sell the right idea.
Super important. The context of the person you're talking to. Something might appeal to something, someone else might not appeal to someone else. So
exactly. So let's talk about insight, right? Mm-hmm. I think one of the things you mentioned at the beginning was, how do you reframe feedback? How do you reframe insight into these hypotheses based that you could then, experiment? So we want to, people that have built great product, right, do differently in terms of turning those insights into like a very good product bet that leads to outcome.
So I think from experience, if I think about this, every product team has insights, right? You get insights one way or the other. You're getting insights from sales, you're getting insights from customers, you're getting insights from your feedback loops, and that's all great. But the work is in how do you distill that insights into testable hypotheses rather than very vague goals. And this comes back to the question that we were talking about before, is that is the skill that's a muscle that gets better the more you do it, right? So when people are turning insights into bets, it's about, in my mind, a bet is one way to think about it, but in another mind, it's a testable hypothesis, right? So when you think about that, some practical tips around that is, you've got to tie it to a clear customer problem. It has to be a real problem to solve, right? It has to be that, not just interesting observations, right? Oh well, we observed this and this is that, oh well, this there. Customers prefer to click the button here. Like, oh, that's all great, excellent. That's not what's the problem that we are trying to solve? The real customer problem, right? So that helps. Keeping it concise, keeping it testable, keeping it not vague, tied to a customer problem, and then often what helps beat the ambiguity around hypotheses is learning can be chained, which is, what do we need to learn first before we need to learn something else? And at each stage of learning, you are deciding whether you want to commit more resources or not. Have we learned enough that we want to now, let's just take an example. I've done the first level of learning where I'm trying to build a new product. You know what? I've done it. I've kind of put it in front of, run a customer test. I've run it in a focus group. I've done that. And it's been positive. Customers seem to like this. But this is not giving me the scale of data that I want. The learning has been customers like it. And I've spoken to 20, 30, 40 customers, and this is great. Excellent. But that's not enough to convince people that I need to spend 300, 400,000, 500,000 of engineering resources to build it. So now I need data at scale, right? I need data at scale. So now I'm going to go, the next learning I'm going to do is, do enough people want this? I know people want this, but the question now is, do enough people want this? And the difference between that stage to the next stage is, hey, okay, we're going to invest a little bit more resources. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a digital marketer or a growth hacker in. We're gonna fake door it. We're gonna build a 2-day fake door. We're gonna launch it on social media or wherever we want to launch it. See what happens.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to invest a little bit more money. I'm going to invest a little bit more resources. But the experiment I'm going to launch is going to allow me to answer the question, do enough people want it? And that's the way you gotta think about turning that into bets. Learnings can be chained.
I like that. Pretty insightful. Thanks.
So we've talked about previously product-led. It sounds good, but it's hard to do in practice. What, in your experience, gets in the way of that? I mean, there's a ton of reasons that come to mind, but I'm curious how you define that.
It's at different levels, right? I think within a product level and within an engineering and a thing level, it is more around the structure of doing this, right? I think that usually gets in the way. Are we using the right mechanisms, the tools that we need to be able to use to be able to convey the information that we need to do? And that's at one level. I think at a higher level, at a more org-wide level, it's incentives, right? Are incentives tied to delivery or are they tied to outcomes, right? Which is, hey, if you launch this feature by this quarter, you are going to get a rating of, whatever. You in your end of year rating, you've proven great. You did it on time. You're dependable. Great, excellent. Okay, that's great, and that is an absolutely fine rating to get, right? Because you did something, you worked hard at it, and you got it delivered. Brilliant. You're very, very good at it. Or it is, hey, the entire product team is incentivized to deliver customer adoption, to increase customer adoption by 10%. So your incentives are tied to increasing and empowering that product team to be able to do what they need to do to increase customer adoption, so that your business gets the right outcome, the team gets the right outcome, and then your incentives are now tied not to delivery, but they're tied to outcomes. So that's important. I think sometimes people don't trust data. They just don't. They just go, and I mean, I come from a consulting background, right? And in consulting background, data is key, and data is always there and it's always accessible. You go, but it comes from a fact that most people don't have the trust in data, right? I mean, and I've seen it in multiple organizations. I would take their own data and present it back to them with insights, and they would go, I don't believe it. I don't trust this data. This data, the way I know this data is the way it's collected. It's I don't believe it. This is rubbish, right? And then you go, so there's a lack of data, and there's a lack of trust in data and insights, right? And you go, okay, all right. So you've got to almost build that, right? And again, it's a muscle, right? Because data, being flexible with data and how you cut it, how you work it, or insight takes a while. There's also a level of discomfort with, being ambiguous, which is, let's just build it. Just build it. You know what? It's that mindset. Just go build it. And, that comes with experience. That's at a leadership level. That comes with a little bit of being happy with the discomfort that is there by not just building it. And that's important. And some people think, in my mind, this slides to the last point, is that product-led means, hypothesis-led means not building things. No, because without building things, you don't actually have anything out there that's going to actually do anything. For me, it's about building the right things. These are some of the things that I've seen through my years of experience that gets in the way.
Okay. Quant data, core data, all the data science, and how do you balance data science in general with intuition without swinging too far in either direction? And I say this because we all know that you can manipulate data to fit whatever agenda you've got. Yeah. So when in the process of building this experimentation engine, or in the process of thinking about this entire experiment structure, being hypothesis led, how do we ensure that we're not swinging too far and bring a lens of objectivity to how we read and interpret the data and use it?
It's a good question, right? And I'll give you my kind of mantra that I stick to when it comes to this, right? Never let data inform your generator hypothesis. Think about it. I'll go one step further. Right? It took me a while to get to this, and I was like, okay, what does that really mean? A hypothesis generally comes from an intuition, right? If you think about where roadmaps came from an intuition, came from insights from sales, from customers, from knowing the industry really well, knowing what you do really well, and that those are intuitions, and that's what used to get put on the roadmap. You should never let data generate an hypothesis for you. What data does is it helps you test it. It's a testing mechanism rather than a hypothesis generating mechanism. Because to your earlier point, and what data can be cut in any ways. It can be synthesized in many ways to show insights. But once you already have an hypothesis and you already got any hypothesis, then you will start getting the data to either prove or disprove that hypothesis. So you are not relying on the data to create an hypothesis. You are still relying on your intuition. You're still relying on your signals that you get from the wider organization around what's the right thing to build, and that's kind of helping create an hypothesis. But now you're using data to either validate it or not validate it, right? And that helps. But I think about the reliance on data, and I think one thing that people kind of go is there has to be that tension between the signals that you're getting and what your gut is saying and what that data is saying is a good place to be. Often people don't like being here because it gives people a lot of mixed kind of views. Well, you know what, my gut is telling me I need to do this. My sales people are telling me and my customer people are telling me this, but my data is not needed. That tension is a good tension to have, right? Because when you're in that area, you kind of dig deeper. You're going to go like, what is the right hypothesis for me to create here that can allow me to simplify this? And I think you got to use it to size the opportunity, not just analyze what's happened in the past. Right? So data has got to be a tool that allows you to test your hypotheses. It allows you to kind of work in that space of where there's that tension between what the signals you're getting and the gut. Helps you kind of muddle through that and get that right. But it also helps you size the opportunity that's in front of you. And those are 2 or 3 things that data, in my mind, if you use it right, helps you rather than hinders you. Because you're right, you can go down a rabbit hole when looking at data science. Or you could run queries for weeks and months and looking at all that, and you could go further down and down and down and might not ever get out of it. So in my mind, you've got to be able to balance that, right, with being practical on how you use it.
Okay, so where does the place of when you run an experiment and it fails, right? The data tells you like, oh, this experiment failed, right? And there's a learning from it, right? So how do you then classify the learning from a test to then generate your next hypothesis?
That's a good follow-up, right? Learning from a test, in my mind, informs your intuition, right?
To create a hypothesis, okay.
Create a hypothesis. So when you've created a test, the first test that was created on a base of intuition or a signal that you received, right? And then you ran the data sets on it, and you ran the test, you collected the data. What actually happened all through that process was your intuition was getting refined. Your understanding of the problem space was getting refined. Your variables that you need to consider were getting refined. And once you come out of that, you go, all right, now the next hypothesis that I can create is this. And then you can get the data for it, right? So when I say don't let data generate hypothesis, don't hold it completely to it does, but you can't just use data to inform out, because data can be manipulated to say whatever you wanted to say. So you've got to have that intuition, you've got to have the product knowledge, you've got to have the industry knowledge, you've got to have the sales and signals, you've got to have the support signals, the other signals to say this is what intuition is saying. Let data test it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get what you mean now. So, okay, so we are in a very fast era now. If you do something today, when you wake up tomorrow morning, there's so much probability or high chance that that's not the best way or the most optimized way to do it because of AI. Things are changing very fast. So, based on your background, right, with AI, how are you seeing this new era of AI influencing the way experimentation is done and hypothesis designs? Like, how does AI really influence it?
It's a good question. I've been thinking about this for a while, right? Because tools are evolving faster than you can keep up. Right? That is the reality of the world we're living in today, right? More and more tools are coming around, and I always kind of take a step back and I go, let's put it this way. AI, in my mind, is an enabler for faster learning, not a replacement, right? Now, what I mean by that is the skill to frame the hypothesis, to frame the questions, to frame the experiment, that comes from years of experience. Yeah. But where in the past I would have spent 2 days doing some desk research to collect the data to inform my hypothesis, now that can happen in 2 hours. So it makes a good product manager, designer more efficient, but what it doesn't do is make you a better product manager or designer. That only comes with having lived it and understood how to frame problems, how to kind of create that, right? And look, there's a lot of benefit. You can, it helps getting experiment results faster. You can run experiments faster. You can generate UI faster, but you still got to know what you got to do. You still got to understand what's the problem to frame, what's the hypothesis to have, how do you get that? You can simulate user segments really quickly, and it allows you to run your experiments faster. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't take away what is the experiment to run and what is the metrics that I'm going to define and how am I going to test it and what are the right tests to run, right? So, that's just, I think, the way our industry is going to evolve, right? It's going to go to a fact where good PMs and designers and engineers will become more efficient, will become better with the use of AI and the tools that we use. But I do not see them completely, at least in the near short term, saying, you know what, don't need a PM. I can just use AI to do the PM work. Maybe some organizations that might work, but in a vast number of organizations, that core skill set, it comes with experience. That's at least the way I at least think of it.
Okay, since we're on the topic of like building teams and how teams could evolve in the future, if you were building a product team from scratch in today's world, in this scenario, right? What would you borrow from your past? What would you leave behind? And what would you embrace about the state of tech today?
Look, I would love to be able to bring the customer discovery rituals, like, just being able to, that ritual of talking to a customer, just sitting in front of a customer and just talking to them and understanding the problem, understanding their space. I love that, right? Love to bring that from the past. Love to be able to bring cross-functional collaboration in my mind, because I think often problems are not solved in silos. They are solved when cross-functionally teams come together. And that is one of the best things that kind of came out from Agile and everything that kind of came from what we spoke about earlier. That cross-function collaboration is critical in my mind. I think being outcome oriented, absolutely want to kind of bring that forward. What I would like to leave behind is, and this is hard because I've done it in so many places before, because hey, that's the way it's, roadmaps tied to rigid timelines. I think that is, there's a time and place for it, and I think it's there and it's worked. But the world that we're going into, if you're not building the right thing, very soon those outcomes, will just be very difficult to achieve. So with that last point, it's about, for me, not over-indexing on outputs just to align stakeholders, right? Because that is a part of our industry that is there and that's required and that's there and that's fine in the work that we do. But I think just over-indexing on it is a little bit, I would rather focus on the outcomes. And this is me being very honest with you, right? So, and then as I move forward, I would want to go with, Agile was all about, let's ship it after the sprint. I think leave that behind. Now it's, let's test it. Everything's a test, right? Everything is a test. And then using AI to make that process faster and, using that to do that more efficiently. Because look, time save is super critical. So an AI will allow us to do that, right?
This has been very, very detailed and very practical. Especially, I love how you've always been shipping in a lot of stories to really back your answers, and it's been very practical as much as it could be. I really enjoy it, like moving from the output focus to sort of like outcome, which is really, really best. So we're going to go to the last segment of getting to know you.
Yeah.
So we call it the learning corner. So just 3 basic questions. What's one tool or app that you emotionally are loyal to, and if it's not the best, you are using that right now?
I'm gonna have to do 2 here, right? Because I was thinking about it and then you kind of sent this through earlier, and I was like, well, what I really love is the Notes app on my phone, right? It's so multifaceted. The Notes app, I can scan documents, I can put notes in there, I can create lists on it, and then I can discard lists, I can share lists, I can do whatever. I can be as unstructured as I want to be and it's still there, and it's kind of all across all my devices and everything, and I can just pick up where I left off and go through. Right? So I love the Notes app on my phone. Brilliant.
You mean the Apple Notes app?
Yeah, the Apple Notes app, right?
Oh.
It's I used to not be a fan of it, and very recently I've just kind of started going, you know what? It's pretty useful, and that's just the thing. But I think from a product management point of view, right? For me, I'm irrationally loyal to Trello. I just am, right? And I will not admit this to anyone ever again. But the point is, yeah, I know it is just basically, it is post-its being stuck onto a Roomba. Right? That's the way I describe it, right? That's what Trello is. But look, it's not best for a scaled roadmap. It's not, right? I would never ever tell anyone to go into scaling and go into Trello, right? But it allows me to just dump my thoughts into cards, into a neat format. I could be at 11:30 at night. I could be sitting having a conversation. I can just open up the Trello app, put a hypothesis in there. It's messy. It's there. Customer insights, without actually having to fight the tool. So it's good for that, right? It's good for that. Which is, I've planned. I planned my entire wedding on Trello as well. By the way, this is, that's it. So that was fine, right? And I think, look, I've tried it. I've tried all the other tools that are there, and I think there are great tools out there to allow you to build scaled roadmaps and kind of scale organizations and all those. But in my mind, Trello is like that old, slightly chaotic friend. It's there when you need them. It's just there. You just bring it up and you put a thought in there, and it's there, and you can pick it up again. And this is why I said that I had to caveat it, right? Because what I'm finding myself do now is that I'm moving away from Trello a lot more to Notes, because it's meeting those needs, right? I can just dump my thoughts in there. Some hypothesis that I want will be there. It'll turn up on wherever I want it to be. So yeah.
Nice. I would say I'm also a very, very good user of Notes. And that's one of the reasons why I've not fully been adopted to Notion.
Yeah.
By mistake, I want to put down something. I'm turning out notes, putting in my ideas. It's easy. It syncs across all your products. So I love it. So that's what I use. Even though I try to use Notion sometimes, but I like that. So what's one book, could be a show or podcast that you would like to recommend for anyone, like just feel like you like this? Anyone should listen to it.
Marty Kagan inspired. It's my Bible. It's what I live by. But the point being, I think Marty Kagan inspired. It is a actual, in my mind, for anyone within the product world, within the product management world, designer world, I think it's got an answer for most questions that you would ever have, right? And because it comes from experience. He's written it from a point of view which allows you to kind of rationalize things as you have built them. So for me, I think that's been my Bible in the product world, right? I mean, I almost have it. I have a version of it that sits neatly on my table behind, which is not touched, and it's there in the library. But then I have a version which is taped up, which is lined up, which has Post-it sitting in there, because it has an insight for everything. So I think that would go that, the inspired book by Marty Kagan, right? And then the follow-up to that, which is Empowered, which is how you're going to scale that into delivery organizations as well, is also very good.
Yeah, good. So the last one is, where can our audience find you and how can they be of help?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So it's Kritarth Saurabh. My profile is public. So just search for it, and you can connect with me there, and we can have a chat.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a very, very good section. I enjoyed it myself. So
good. It was been fun conversations. I think you guys managed to make me reflect quite a lot as well. Go back to times when that were deep scars from hypothesis learning, which is good. But you know what? I think these kind of conversations help. Right? They help solidify. They help bring some thoughts to the front of the mind, and the things that things that I'd forgotten, things that I've kind of had, the things I want to take back to needs, right? So that'll help.
I love it. Thank you so much for indulging us as well. I think we're starting to see a common thread amongst guests coming on the podcast, having this kind of feedback. So, which is great, because we put a lot of thought into how we frame these questions. So thank you once again for coming on the podcast.
Cheers.
Till next time, everyone. Bye.
Perfect. Cheers.
Bye.
Love you to meet you, Emmanuel. Bye.